All right. What's up, everybody, and welcome back. Yesterday, I put up a video about how Rogue's mass changeling strategy is dumb and bad, and then we saw this. Look at Clem's camera. Oh my gosh. Sorry, you guys want to see that again? Let's go back a second. Just to get, look, Baneling's hitting the ghosts. Nidus is and Changeling's in the back door. Changeling's blocking his army. They're also blocking him moving out of his base right now. Watch Clem's camera. And we get a second punch? There we go. There's the second punch on the table. Frustrated, tossing back in the chair. He looks mad. And to be fair, I did say this is a very frustrating strategy to play against. So maybe I'm right. Maybe I wasn't wrong. No, guys. What did I say yesterday? I clearly said Clem's going to shut this down really hard. I don't think it'll do well. I wasn't super confident, but I was like, I'm pretty sure Clem's going to be the fastest, best player at clicking the changelings down, not letting them in his base. He's going to shut them down. I'll own up to it. I was wrong. Clem played much worse than Beyond against this strategy. Maybe it's his first time playing against it. Maybe he was having an off day. He didn't play his best in a lot of the situations, but honestly, he got demolished. The changelings ruined him at multiple times. I just cast the series. This is from the Big Lu Cup 2, Big Luli Cup. I don't know how to say that. It's a Chinese tournament. And he did lose 3-1 in that semifinals. Man, this was such an early first night. It's Rogue had such a good early game. This is crazy. The speed he got in there. Okay, so let's go in here and take a look. Check it out, guys. Changelings coming forward. And look at this. This is the first big changeling wave in this match. And Rogue had a great early game. He kind of shut Clem down. He had a good start. Doesn't matter. This is really easy. All you're meant to do is select your tanks, control click, and shift click on these, and they'll die to the splash damage. Look at how Clem deals with this. He individually clicks every single changeling with these 3 marines, which is so inefficient. It's such a hard way to do it. And because of that, he lets a changeling through. The changeling comes into the main base, pops a Nidus. He's so distracted by a few roaches on the right side. And then look at this distraction move on the left. Rogue runs in with like 10 Zerglings and 30 Overseers. Like, look at me! Clem moves his whole army to respond. And the Nidus pops in the main base. And it's just, from there, it's a crapshoot. They just keep getting with the changelings. He keeps throwing Nidus worms up. It is a disaster. So I was totally wrong. Clem got wrecked by this. Let's clarify a few different points here from the original video. First of all, the math on the overlords. In the last video, I pointed out, guys, we've got a little script here, a few notes we made after casting that game. So basically, you need 170 supply required to max out. The reason is 6 hatcheries provide 30 supply. You're always going to have 6 hatcheries by late game, usually 9 or 10. Each one gives you 6 supply. So actually, even just 5 hatcheries provides 30. So we're being very generous with this math as well, right? So that gives you 30 supply, which means you just need 170 supply left to max. That's 22 overlords. But Rogue builds 50 plus usually. I checked the VODs, guys. I checked through the replays, the VODs. He always builds at least 50 overlords. Here's an example of him, 44 overseers, 9 overlords. That's 53 total. There's other games where he's up to as high as 60 overlords. So he's always building a minimum of 50. Let's be generous and let's say, okay, he builds, 50, 55. So that's about 30 extra overlords. Let's say he builds 52 every game, which is lower than what he normally does. That's 30 extra overlords. So that is 3,000 minerals that he only is using because he's massing overseers. So we have to count this cost because he's not getting a supply benefit from those 30 overlords. So that's the 3,000 minerals, which a lot of people didn't realize in the comments of my last video. The other thing is we're just counting minerals and gas as the same here. We're just talking total resource cost, making 40 overseers. So this is just the upgrade cost, 50 minerals and 50 gas for each overseer. So 100 total resources. That's 4,000 resources. We don't need a calculator for any of this. 40 Niduses as well at 150 resource. 75 for each Nidus. That's another 6,000. So if you add this together, 13,000 resources. I think I said something like 14 or 16,000 in the video, and a lot of you were saying it's only 8,000 or 9,000. So just to clarify, I think this is probably the fairest number. I was being a little rough with my math, just estimating things. This is going to show you a much more accurate reading. I think it costs you about 13,000 resources to do a mixture of mass Nidus worms and to get up the overseers for the mass changeling. So I wanted to clear that up because I was a little sloppy on the math. A lot of you thought I was being super disingenuous there, but it was just a little bit of miscommunication. Keep in mind, we're not accounting for things like the 3 Nidus worms. If we want to account for those, the Nidus and the original buildings, I don't know how much a Nidus costs, like 150. That's like another 450 resources. We're not even going to count that. Like I said, we're being pretty friendly on the maths here. Did you actually check the Nidus deaths? 40 seems pretty high. Okay, so this is a good point. This is a really good point from Twitch chat. We're doing this one live on stream. It's not always 40. Let's say it's 20. If only 20 Niduses, That's a 3,000 resource addition, which would be, it'd be 10k. Which is that's a big difference. That is a big difference. So if you do win with the first few waves of Nidus Worms, you can win this quickly. The Clem replay, I think there's only 13 Niduses at the very end of this entire game. This is a rare case. Clem kind of falls apart to the first wave though, which, you could argue he could have won this game with a single Nidus Worm and 4 Overseers. Like, Clem let this one get up really easily, but there are cases where it's a little bit cheaper. Either way, you're looking at upfront cost of a bare minimum of about 8,000 resources, and the upper end is going to be 13, maybe as high as 14,000 resources in others. This is less than a total base of mining. A total base of mining is going to be like 14,500. So it's going to be about 1 base of total mining, which we talked about, if you mine extra bases as a result of this, totally worth it. If you could have mined those bases anyway, you can't really counter that in. Now, a lot of people brought up the point that I was talking about in my last video, but if you mine their bases, you get double mining because it denies them minerals and gives you minerals 100%. And you guys are correct. But remember, we're not talking about mining bases as an advantage of this strategy because I don't think we've seen Rogue use this to mine forward bases pretty much at all. I feel like in the games, as well as with his other strategies, he could have mined those forward bases without having this. So I don't think it's fair to say making Overseers and Nidus Worms automatically allows you to mine out bases until we see someone put that into action. So we're not going to be paying attention to that for now. Now, the next thing, guys, Overseers blocking snipes. This is a huge thing. People pointed out in the comments, which I totally missed, and I was totally wrong on in the first video. We didn't see it too much in the Beyond game. We didn't see it too much in the Gumiho game, but you're going to see it more in this game here. So let's find a good example. There's at least one big fight in this game, over here on this left side, where Rogue actually sieges Mass Overseer on top of his Lurkers and Changelings as well, so he can't snipe them. Now, I don't think we really see it matter much because he wouldn't have been able to snipe it anyway because his ghosts are in the main base dealing with Nidus Worms 90% of the time. But it's actually a cool thing where people were pointing this out and I'm like, that's totally valid. Now, people have been using Overseers to block your opponent against Protoss for years. And the reason is Protoss wants to feed back your Vipers. So you would clump up 10, 20 Overseers with your Vipers, and feedback is a single target spell. You're trying to cast it. You're just wasting feedbacks, damaging Overseers when you want to be hitting the Vipers. So this is not something new, using it to shield other units, but I haven't seen it like this, where you're on top of the Lurkers, and even if you scan, you're like, man, I can maybe get these front 3 Lurkers and this one, but how can I click on these other Lurkers? Like, you can't. What are you going to be rotating your camera while microing? That's so difficult. So this is actually something that I wasn't factoring in at all, and this is really, really cool. The final fight of this game, he also has them on top of his Banelings, so the tanks can't really target them very well. And like, here's a good example, you see? You can't really target very well. Now, there's no ghosts here, so it didn't really matter, but if you're engaging this with Clem, how are you sniping? So this is an extra cool thing. I did not factor this in, and this is actually one of the big bonuses I didn't really initially think about as much, and how much this could be very irritating, especially if you're very ghost-focused rather than tank-focused on your defense. I don't think it affects tanks against Lurkers, but let's go to that final fight, and I'll show you guys how it affects Banelings. It doesn't really matter because Clem's just getting destroyed in this game. All right, so you can see, even if sometimes you'd have a few tanks or Widow Mines, and Clem's really big on retargeting Widow Mines on the Banelings, he'd accidentally be clicking on an Overseer, which would probably fly ahead of the Banelings if he tried to do that. And tanks, it's really hard to see them. So there's mass Baneling coming in here. It's so hard to see them if you don't, zoom your camera in, right? So there's actually a lot of bonuses to using the Overseers as a unit to block your opponent's vision. If you're playing at low level, you're playing someone with a bad computer, this is also just going to break someone's computer because there's too many units on the screen and they're going to get a big frame drop. So kind of funny troll thing you could do, not really going to matter at pro play where people are playing with really high-powered computers. Now, how much do we factor this in? I can't give this a resource cost, guys. This is just a cool bonus. I think this really helps in a pure Ghost versus Lurker interaction. A lot. Just a massive, massive thing that I didn't factor in, and I think is one of the big benefits that's hard for me to quantify until I've seen more games, but it is definitely a big thing, and thank you, commenters, for pointing out that I missed that one. You wouldn't think he's getting destroyed based off bank and supply, because Rogue spent so much friggin' money setting this up. Yeah, it's such a crazy upfront cost. And that's the thing, is like, that's why if you do just turtle it out, like Beyond was crushing this until he let the Nidus in his main as well. All right, so we've talked about cost a lot. What we haven't talked about as much is APM cost. And what I love, and I talked about so much casting this series just now, is the fact that Rogue has kind of just added a macro cycle. It's a piece to his macro cycle. It's part of his rhythm. And he can do this, say, after injecting every game. So what he can do is he can go inject, 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 build units, go to his overseers, control click, hold down the changeling key. All those changelings drop. You can control click the changelings to select them. We'll see when he does the first wave in a second. So you control click these, and you just either click them into their base, or you can click in their base, deselect a few of them with shift click there, deselect a few, click here, deselect a few, click to this base, deselect a few, click in behind the natural for the rest of them. So that way they kind of spread out, and it's even harder for your opponent to deal with. Now, he's so fast. He could do all this in about 2 seconds, right? So, like I said, it's really easy, guys. You jump there, hold down, click. Like I was just explaining to you how to do it. I can do that so quickly. Drop them, bam, 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 bam. You go there, bam, bam, bam. I'm nowhere near as fast as Rogue or Clem. That's done. 2 seconds maximum. So you can go for that in 2 seconds. Now, if we watch Clem's response, how much APM is it going to take to deal with this? And this isn't even a split up one. So this is the easy one to deal with. Now watch Clem. He sees it. This is when he starts dealing with it. We're on actual game time. 12:10 is when he starts dealing with it. 5 seconds. You spent 2 seconds to waste 5 of his seconds. Think about how big that is. You might not realize, if you're not an experienced StarCraft player, if you can spend APM to waste 2.5 times their APM, so your actions waste 2.5 times the respective actions to deal with it, that's massive. This is why we love queuing up Liberators as Terran. Takes a lot more actions. They have to pull the drones away, build a spore around, move a queen, and then you reposition the Liberator. This is a way of creating APM asymmetry, which is so big. So that's what Rogue is doing here. He's creating APM asymmetry. This is massive. And if he split them up, it would be even more. And he can just do this continually, and it's frustrating, it's tiring, and it's hard for his opponent to deal with. Now, to be fair, is it actually going to be that much of an APM asymmetry? Clem dealt with this the worst way possible. If Clem just selected his tanks and clicked on it, it might have only taken him 2 seconds, which is why having them spread out, come from multiple sides, come from multiple bases, is the maximum way to try and drain your opponent's APM. And that's why I think if Rogue can, tell them to go to different places so they're a bit more spread out, it's naturally going to waste a bit more APM, and that's what he should be doing as he evolves this style. Now that brings us to our next point. You can make this easier as a Terran by walling off and shutting down the changelings and leaving one entrance with tanks to easily focus with just a few shift clicks. Don't click every marine like Clem. So, what do I mean by that? I really feel like put a planetary here with 2 tanks behind it so lurkers can't just siege it, build a depot on the side to seal the wall, and build an engineering bay on the other side to seal the wall. Once that's completely sealed, changelings can't come in from there. Do the same thing on the right side, seal it. I know this sounds expensive. Your opponent's spending 10 to 14,000 resources for this Nidus spam mass overseer stuff. You can afford to spend a few thousand resources on walling off. Like, you're not even, it's super duper worth it. So you can wall that off, and then you just leave one entrance so you don't, so if they start spreading changelings in, we might see people do this where they wall off the sides, leave one opening, and that's all they're going to do. So that's going to be really, really, really big. You can wall off the base, make it easier. Problem, if you don't let changelings into your base, the cost equation changes. So if you're just sitting at home, shutting down changelings, all your APMs on that, guess what? It doesn't cost as much. So let's go back to our cost analysis really quickly as we tab out. The 40 Niduses, or even the 20 Niduses. If we never let changelings in, and they're not spending money on the Niduses, guess what? It's just the initial cost of the Overseers and Overlords, which is 7,000. So it's not as much. If you don't let them even get anywhere to place a Nidus Worm in the first place, they aren't wasting as much resources. And that means you do have more pressure on you to actually move out and make sure you secure those middle bases on the map. This one here, to make sure you don't fall too far behind in bases, right? So this is actually just an interesting thing to think about, which is why I was having a whole discussion with Twitch chat with people saying, well, why not just leave tanks in your bases? And the reason is, if you leave a tank here, you're not covering down here. So you gotta have what? A tank covering this area, a tank covering this area, 2 tanks, 3, 4. Like, you gotta have at least 4 tanks, maybe more, around your base. And you might think, well, maybe it's worth it, because then he's gonna keep wasting Nidus Worms. They're just gonna die. Like, of course that's worth it. Problem. So here is a game that's earlier in the series where Clem does just that. He leaves 4 to 5 tanks in his base the entire game, and this keeps happening. Rogue keeps throwing them in the minimum firing range of the tanks. So there is 2 tanks here. They're not even shooting it. The Nidus Worm gets up, pops out a bunch of lurkers on top of the siege tanks. Like, this is why just leaving, there's no just set and forget way to deal with it. If the changelings get into your base, there is no way to set and forget. He will find a way to get in. Well, people said, but Pig, well, why not just leave bio there? Leave 15 supply of bio around the base. What are you going to do with 15 supply of bio? Explain this to me, guys. What are you going to leave? 15 supply of bio here? He's going to put a Nidus here. Well, okay, but you spread it out. You cover everywhere the 15 supply of bio. Okay. He has 3 Nidus Worms, guys. If you have 1 Marine and 1 Marauder here, he throws 3 Nidus Worms next to them. You don't even stop one before units pop out. So if you want to leave bio to defend, you can, but you need to have 25 supply of bio left around the bases, and you still need to stim it around and move them around a little bit. Now, this might be worth it. I'm going to ignore your changelings and just deal with it. And knowing Clem, he might opt for this approach because I don't think he likes clicking on the changelings. Why would you opt on this approach? Because then you're getting the value from the Nidus Worms. You're baiting them. You're saying, oh, look, I don't have tanks or anything here. You've got vision. Your opponent keeps throwing Nidus Worms. So if you can handle the APM of actually shutting those down manually with your bio without letting them get up, you could argue your win condition is the Zerg throwing so much money away on Nidus Worms that don't achieve anything. That's getting you further ahead, combined with the Overseer cost, right? I would not risk it, because I know I'd let a Nidus Worm get up. But maybe Clem or Bjorn or one of these guys wants to let that happen. And they're like, that's fine. I'll just let you keep spamming Niduses, and I will slowly gain value from that. So there's different ways to approach this, right? But I do think it's kind of interesting. I would wall off and just try to shut the changelings down myself, but we'll see how it evolves as he plays this strategy more. All right, guys, so this about brings us to the end of this video. Clem did not live up to my expectation. He got shut down by this. He looked angry, looked like he was very tilted by it. And I think Rogue was always aiming to frustrate his opponents, especially things like this, his army getting stuck. I think this was compounded on the fact that regularly throughout this series, Clem had tank siege up to deal with a Nidus, and then they blocked his tanks from getting out of his base later. Or on Dynasty, he even walled off half of his base. He had like 6 tanks trapped inside his main. This was one of those days where Clem was floundering. Like there was, the changelings and the Niduses, it felt like stacked so many problems that Clem could not handle it. This was awesome. I love that Rogue's playing this style. It's really creative. It's really cool. Is it overall the greatest thing of all time? I don't think this is like, oh my God, it's going to change the world and the meta and we're going to be doing this for years. But right now, Rogue is one of the few players presenting new creative problems for Terran players to solve. And he's kind of saying, hey, you guys like to turtle and just sit behind your planetaries and build a billion orbital command centers. How can I deal with it? I love that he's found such a creative way to deal with this. So I'm just so pleased with Rogue for making the game really interesting right now. So quick back from the military, already causing problems, and one of the few players to upset Clem since his dominant world championship victory. Hats off to Rogue. And let me know if you guys feel like I missed any details on this in the comments. I learned a lot from the last comments, as well as learned that I communicated a bit poorly on some of my things. So as always, if you guys have more feedback or questions, let them know. And I've really been enjoying having a good discussion about this meta shift that Rogue is creating here. Looking forward to seeing if anyone tries it out on the ladder as well. Thanks for watching, guys. We'll see you in the next one. Goodbye and good night.